So our next panel is going to dig a little bit deeper into the life sciences strategy. And we're going to take a look at a variety of sectors and stakeholders within the life sciences community and have a discussion around what are some of the common themes and issues that we could tackle as part of a strategic approach and a coordinated strategy for our industry. Moderating this session will be Andrew Casey, President and CEO of BIOTECanada. Andrew represents at the national level a very diverse group of members, and I think he is very well equipped to host this panel, bringing these various perspectives together. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Casey.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, all. How am I going to start this off? Let's start it off by first commending you, Jason, for the panel. When you first look at the panel, it can, in many respects, you sort of scratch your head and go, what kind of panel is this? More often than not, I go to these sessions and it's a very neat package, right? You have a panel of investors, or you have a panel of companies, or you have a panel. This is my contact lens. A panel of large companies all talking about what they need to do. You can get a little bit more ambitious with some panels where you put together the small company, the big company, the investor, and maybe a patient group. That can be done. But this one, in many respects, as you said, Jason, dives a lot deeper and really puts the cat amongst the pigeons in some sense. And certainly when you look at the different representatives on this panel, it's going to make for, I think, a very lively discussion in terms of trying to figure out a prescription, to borrow one sector's analogy, for the sector writ large. So our panelists, I think I'll just go right across. Neil Fraser, who's with Medtronic. I won't read any bios because that sort of eats away at a ton of time, so I won't do that. And Waddell, who is with BioAmber, and Michael Midmer of Genome Canada. Sorry, Michael. And Don McCabe, who is with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and some guy named Rafi Hofstein from Mars Innovation, who I think everybody in this room knows well, so don't really need to introduce you. I know, I promise you. It's my other contact lens. Okay, so what do you do with such a diverse group of industries and sectors in terms of developing our overall strategy? I think the one key thing to all of this is that the industries that are here are sort of born of the same opportunity, and that opportunity finds itself in a world that's going to 9 billion people, and as our panel said before, that we're going to need to do several different things to deal with this population boom and the pressures that we're putting on the planet. And in some respects, we're going to need to find 60% more production out of our agricultural community, but I think that's sort of symbolic of what's happening in all the other sectors as well. We have to find ways to heal, fuel, feed, however you want to phrase it, but we cannot continue to lead our lives the way we have been leading them. So we have to fundamentally change how we manufacture, grow, and feed and heal people. And so out of that opportunity comes what I see as the enormous opportunity for this sector, which is life sciences, which sort of covers a broad spectrum. And there's two parts to that. There's one which is mitigation, which we know is something we all have to do. We have to find ways to lessen our impact on the planet going forward. We have to find the new ways to grow, to manufacture, and to put less of an imprint on this planet. But we also have to adapt to what is already a changed environment, and we know that. Genome Canada can tell you very well as they sort of grapple with the mountain pine beetle, which has been allowed to flourish in our forests, if only because our climate has fundamentally changed. And that is the same thing right across the board for all of the different sectors in life sciences. And so dealing with those challenges is obviously the enormous opportunity we have. And then common to that opportunity and the challenge of getting to that, to grappling with to grasping the opportunity, and was talked a bit about on the panel before, is the need for investment. That is the fuel that drives a lot of the innovation that we're going to be requiring. And the challenge that we have as a country is that as smart as we are and as great as we are at producing the innovations, we still need that investment capital to come here to drive it forward. And Canada is competing against other nations that understand full well the opportunity that's being presented by the 9 billion person challenge. And so they're moving very aggressively to put in place their strategies to support their sectors, their life science sectors, whether it's biotech or whether it's in the agricultural side of things, but they're all doing their best to sort of outcompete the other jurisdictions, other nations. And the key part to what they're doing is they're putting in place essentially hosting conditions that allow industries to thrive and attract investment. Investment, as we heard earlier, is a bit of a global tourist. It's roaming around the world looking for a place to go, and it's going to stay where it feels the most welcome. And if you think of your country like you would a hotel, and a hotel tries to attract tourists by giving it free amenities, Wi-Fi, breakfast, chocolate on the pillow, great sheets, whatever it is, the countries have to do likewise to attract that global tourist investment. And so what is the chocolate on the pillow? Well, that can be investment, tax credits, it can be regulatory policy, and that's where all of this sort of comes together for these different sectors, is if we're going to develop a strategy for the industry, it sort of spans across everybody's world in the sense of if you're going to put in the proper hosting conditions, those hosting conditions have to be warm and welcome for all investors, for all sectors. And so that's kind of what we're all grappling with. And I think we're going to sort of listen to everybody's individual piece. And I would only say one little piece before I sort of hand it over to my panelists here, which is picking up on the theme from earlier. We go to BIO every year, as it was referenced, which is the large sort of the international convention down in the US. And at that you have a number of different countries that are there, and they're all sort of putting out their welcome mats to attract investors. And we brag a lot about the industry that we do have. And one of the things that I've heard from my colleagues from the other international jurisdictions is we wish we could be more like you. So as we sit in this room and kvetch a little bit about how woe is us, and we sit in this phenomenal facility that is now host to J-Labs, and it's across the street from one of the best educational institutions in the country, in a city where you have all sorts of multinational pharma and big business and other investors. We've got a lot of things going for this city and for this industry writ large. And so how do we take it to the next level is more the challenge. Instead of sort of worrying about what we need to do at the micro level, there's probably a little bit more at the macro level we can do, but we are starting with a very solid foundation. That's my editorial comment. So I will pass it over to Neil first.
All right. Well, I was asked to give sector perspective from a medical technology vantage point. And so I'm going to talk about, lack of a better analogy, the good, the bad, and the ugly about the reason for investing here in Ontario. The good, as I see it, is the research environment here. Actually, the research environment here is outstanding, and I think that's partly because of the concentration of academic centers. Somebody was talking about University Avenue, but I would see it more broadly as the GTA. But we find we do a very high percent of our company's clinical research in Canada and in this environment. I would add to that something that people don't talk about very often, though, is the role of health economics and epidemiology, because I think that is a really core strength in this region. And I was talking with somebody earlier, you know, it started in Hamilton, actually, with a fellow named David Sackett, who came up with evidence-based medicine as a concept. But that has spread so that we have many centers of excellence, whether it's ISIS or we've got OTAC, Excite, Theta, ARC, CHIPA. You know, we've got all these groups here. And nowadays what we need is evidentiary packages that include the economic data. That really is what gets reimbursement to happen. So I think we have great ingredients in the Ontario and you know, Southern Ontario area in this regard. In terms of ugly, and again, this is pretty sector specific, but the environment of commercialization here, and it's not actually unique to Ontario, I think it's a Canada-wide thing, as I've seen in my travels. But we have issues here with procurement, We have issues here with reimbursement. And, regulation is Canada-wide, but it tends to be, in our sector, one of the slowest in the world. The only one slower that we know of is Japan, actually. And it's not faulting Health Canada. They do a wonderful job of protecting patients. It's just that their process doesn't recognize what's going on anywhere else in the world, and they just simply have to repeat the work, and they're slower at it than the others. So we also have an HTA environment, which is very splintered by province and sometimes by health authority. And in terms of adoption, it was great to hear from Karen Michelle earlier, because when you get a successful HTA outcome, nothing happens. There is just no process that takes a positive outcome and implements it. Now, again, for our sector, it's more complex because often it can drive a change in setting, a change in provider, or it can even engage the patient in their own self-management with digital technologies. So these are, these kinds of changes are disruptive to the silos that exist in healthcare. So it could be very difficult to implement and commercialize medical technology in Ontario. And then the last one, just playfully, the ugly is manufacturing. And although we do have two significant manufacturing sites in Canada, they're not in the GTA. But I was struck recently by some information on Puerto Rico, just as a contrast, that Puerto Rico is about double the size of the GTA in terms of land mass. And it may be interesting to note that 13 of the top 15 medical technology companies in the world have major manufacturing there. Also, 12 of the top 20 pharma and biotech companies are there. They export, just in medical devices alone, $5 billion every year. And I'm sure if you add pharma to that, it's huge. So what are they doing differently that we're not doing? They definitely have different tax benefits there. They have good IP protection. That's not unique. Their skilled labor, and they have a lot of technical schools, but their skilled labor cost is significantly less than Ontario. They have good infrastructure with 11 airports, and they also have a beneficial location to both the US and European markets. So I think there's something we can learn from Puerto Rico, and with that, I'll turn it back to our chair.
Dan.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Life Science Ontario for inviting me to be on this panel. I very much appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the topic. I represent BioAmber. I want you to remember our brand. So you have our brand rather than my picture. We have just completed and are now in production a $140 million facility in Ontario, in Sarnia, Ontario. We employ 60 highly skilled people in biotechnology at that facility, and we are producing 30,000 tons of bio-based succinic acid. Succinic acid, for those of you who don't know, looks like table salt. You use it in plastics, resins, cosmetics, food, and flavorings. We sell, our customers include large customers like Dow, DuPont, Lanxess, PTT, MCC, Mitsui. Some of our specialty customers include the International Food and Flavorings, Oleon, which is a cosmetics ingredient supplier that supplies to L'Oreal. We believe that the chemical industry is on the verge of a transformation. There is no way that bio-based chemicals are going to replace all of the chemicals that are currently produced through petroleum and natural gas. Succinic acid is currently produced using petroleum. Our succinic acid, which uses sugar as a feedstock, and which in future will be able to use sugars from agricultural waste, et cetera, is exactly the same chemical that is currently, we produce exactly the same chemical that is currently produced from petroleum means. And we do that at a carbon neutral footprint. Compared to our petroleum counterpart, we reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 210,000 tons. We have a 64% less consumption of energy, which is the equivalent of power that you would need for about 46,000 houses. We built the Sarnia plant with the help of a joint venture partner, a very small and not very well-known company called Mitsui and Company. We have a 70% share of the joint venture, the Canadian joint venture, and Mitsui has a 30% share of the joint venture. BioAmber, Inc., the parent, is a US-based company. We went IPO in 2013. We are now traded on the New York and Paris exchanges. We did that by and large because we couldn't find reasonable priced capital in this country. And Neil was mentioning manufacturing. The 60 people in our plant in Sarnia are all from the area. They're from their number of engineers from the universities in the area, Western, Guelph. They are graduates of Lambton College. Lambton College produces graduates who are skilled in petrochemical processes, and those same skills are the skills we use in our plant. The production of the plant, over 50% of the production of the plant is under take-or-pay contracts with large customers. And we are in the process currently of qualifying our product with those customers. We have 3 other plants on the books. We are currently siting our next plant. 30,000 tons in the chemical industry is nothing. To be a real commercial plant in the chemical industry, you need to be at least 60,000 tons. We're talking capital in the $500 million range. And venture capital and piecemeal programs don't cut it. And if we are talking about who needs to be at the table here, are some of our financial institutions. When we started to build the Sarnia plant, the government of Ontario and the federal government sent very hardworking people to do the due diligence on our technology and to understand our technology. And they lent us money, which we have started to pay back. They lent us that money at a reasonable cost, and they put in place milestones and deliverables. And we're all for that. We think that that kind of due diligence, and we've been very transparent in terms of talking and keeping the government informed about our technology. And we think that kind of due diligence and that kind of transparency promotes an education about these technologies that allows financial institutions to take the kinds of risks that are going to be necessary to developing many of the technologies that are represented in this room. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Andrew said we need to brag more. And I think we do. I mean, I'll tell you a little bit of story. I coached my son's soccer team. One day he got 7 goals. And he was telling everyone, he was saying, "Daddy, I got 7 goals. I got the winning goal today." And I couldn't help but react and say, "Evan, stop bragging. You can't brag so much." Why do we do that? Okay, it's a Canadian thing maybe. I think we need to brag more. We're living in one of the best countries in the world. We're in one of the best cities in the world for academic research and academic innovation. And I think we need to trumpet our horns. And so I'm going to brag a little bit about what we do at Genome Canada, because I think genomics is something that's just exploding, and it's going to change our world, and it's changing our world today. And in terms of the sectors that we represent, about half of what we invest in is life sciences. And then we invest about a third in agriculture. We invest in forestries. We invest in fisheries. Who would have thought now mining is using genomics, and oil and gas industry? And we're supporting sectors in a number of different ways. So Genome Canada is a not-for-profit. It's funded by the federal government. And we've invested, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. We've invested over $1 billion of capital in a whole range of genomics programs, and that's been co-funded by over $1 billion of industry capital. And you say, well, geez, that's a lot of money. What have you done with it? Well, genomics has taken a while. We first sequenced the human genome, and then it took a while to understand, okay, what can we do with this technology? And so what I do is I manage a program called the GAP program, the Genomic Applications Partnership Program, where as a trial, we've got $40 million to try and partner together industry with academia. And we're saying, okay, we're not going to push stuff out from labs and say, well, what market can we find? We're going to ask the users first, the companies, the market, what do you want? And what academic can we find that has that genomic solution? And we put those two things together. We funded about 25 projects so far with big companies. We're in fisheries with EWAS. We're in agriculture with Elanco. We're in diagnostics with Roche. We're in a couple of Rafi's companies, Vasamune, Exogenic. And it's just amazing to go. I went to a feed mill, Wallenstein feed mill out in Guelph, for our announcement of our first 2 rounds of our GAP program. And there were trucks coming in with raw ingredients, and then trucks leaving with feed for chickens and pigs. And the technology that they're most interested in is enzymes to put in the feed so that they can allow these animals to convert the food more efficiently and reduce waste. And so that's a very simple project. We're going to translate that technology, and we're going to have many others like that. We're doing the same thing in fisheries. Out of Guelph, we've got a scientist there that's helping with breeding of salmon to be resistant to certain diseases and parasites. And we're also supporting smaller companies as well. And so this is cash that the government wants to put into the innovation economy, but they're really trying to tailor it so it gets through that valley of death. And that valley of death, I think it's going to come up in our panel here, is how do we get through that valley or bridge that valley and really pull that technology out of academia to an end market. And that's what we're trying to do at Genome Canada with our GAP program. So I think we'll talk a lot about other initiatives that are doing that, but I just wanted to set the stage that there is some good stuff happening. There needs to be more stuff. We need to brag more. We need to be bolder. And maybe we can talk about a few other initiatives that make sense along those lines.
Thanks, Michael. Don.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be here today. My name's Don McCabe. I'm a farmer from down in southwestern Ontario. And first off, I'd like to set the stage of farming in Ontario and the primary producer, or a farmer's role in moving some of these issues ahead of, in other words, why am I sitting up here? So first off, I thank Randy, who was sitting in this chair before me, on setting up some of the comments that I need to make here. And of course, no insult intended here, Randy, but you just can't be as transparent as I can be, so here goes. The reality is agriculture is your #1 industry in this province, bar none. Some would like to say it's the car industry. If you believe it's the car industry, go boil your damn bumper and enjoy eating it. The #1 industry in this province is agriculture, because we have to have a very full and robust toolbox to ensure that we can do every job we want to do moving ahead. The only reason that we follow California in being as diverse or less diverse in number of crops is because of latitude. they've got a little bit more heat, but now they've got no water. So good luck. Why is Michigan number 2? Because they looked over at Ontario, and because the programs are better in the US, they get a little bit of an edge. That's just me making something up, but what the hey. The reality is, folks, that farmers today have to be a diverse lot who are contributing to a $35 billion industry. Toronto is number 2 or number 3. In my world, it's number 2 when coming to North American food processing, and that's following in Los Angeles, which also fits back to that California thing. So you've got a whole lot of food processing companies here. But the reality is agriculture is much more than just food. And I could sit here and tell you that I'm a cash crop farmer, and I mentioned that one day at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton here in Toronto, and the guy says, oh, you grow money trees. I said, well, if I did, they all died. The reality is I grow corn, soybeans, and wheat. And he said, oh, well, you know, that corn, I eat it all the time in August. Well, no, you eat it all the time because it's in the grocery store every place you look. And the reality is that it spawned a definition for me that I need to share with you now. And when you think about farming, please think of it in the following manner. That farmers are managers of the carbon and nitrogen cycle with the interception of the water cycle to produce starch, oil, fuel, fiber, and energy with protein, while providing animal habitat, improving air quality, improving soil quality, improving water quality. We just want to get paid for something. Because the hard reality is that only 13% of this province is actually privately owned. The rest of it belongs to the Crown. And the reason it belongs to the Crown is because it's a good place to go mining. It's rock. And it's a good place for forests, and we ask other people to go bring those trees back. But the 13% down here is where most of the agriculture is. And we have to share it with annoying things called Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor, Cornwall, and Kingston because you guys keep eating land. In fact, you were eating it at the rate of 350 acres a day from 2006 to 2011. So if it was not for innovation and a technology improvement, we would not achieve the goals that we are now. For example, corn production in this province went from 200 million bushels in 1995 to 300 million bushels. So that's an imperial term. A bushel is that bushel basket you see at the farm market, or it's 56 pounds, or it's 25 kilos, because everybody in Ontario or in the world actually has to go through the Chicago Board of Trade eventually for a pricing opportunity. It's how the world works. So the issue of sitting up here, I would like you to also now think about how a farmer operates. First and foremost, we put food on the table. You have the cheapest food basket in the world. So stop complaining about the issue of, oh my God, it costs this much, because you only spent 10% of your income actually on food. You were done paying for it, including Gail and Weston's vacation, by February 14th or Valentine's Day. You were done paying farmers by January 10th. So the reality is the food's on the table. Next thing I have to do is take care of that soil. If I don't take care of it, I don't feed those microbes and worms and everything else that's in that soil, I can't do the next job. So now I cascade into the next issue, because contrary to some comments already made up here, there's no such thing as waste in agriculture. There's only underutilized, underpriced opportunity. So with all that corn that's now being grown, there's all these corn stalks. That's now another source of sugar that we're looking to exploit and move into the marketplace, because I need to do that to meet sustainable goals. Because for farmers, sustainability means profit, which can't be a dirty word to anybody. Planet, because we only got one, and I just came back from Paris yesterday, so pardon me if I fall asleep up here. And finally, people. And that means inputs and providing it back to our toolbox. Because as a farmer, I buy at retail, I sell at wholesale, and I pay the truck in both ways. So my toolbox has to include labor, it has to include fertilizers and good crop protective chemicals and all the rest of it. But as we move forward here, I totally agree on the issue. We've got to start bragging about what we do and how we do it. We only get excited when the puck goes in the net back in '72, for those that remember it. For the rest of you, Google it. The reality is, folks, we have the best resources possible. Let's get at it. Thank you.
Don.
So before I address what I was asked to address, which is representing the small guys, the SMEs, I have to ask you, do you still remember how to milk by hand?
I never was part of a dairy operation. I was raised on a farm that started off with poultry, hogs, and beef, and the last thing to leave our farm was the beef, and I made that decision.
Because I was many, many years ago, first in my class in cow milking.
Well, I will say this, sir, I do know which end of the cow to milk.
I didn't see that in your bio, Rafi.
At any rate, usually, and this is according to Neil, we have to do it from bottom up. Today, we start from top down, but we actually got a little even because Neil and I spent the good part of last year as OHIC, which led to OCHIS, and we'll talk about it later. But what I have to say, Neil, this is an opportunity to commend you as representative of multinational, that you get it. And I think that if people ask me, what is it that is the #1 accomplishment of the last decade? And Paul is here, and Neil is here, and a few others, Chris is here. Representatives of multinationals finally get it. They understand that it starts with good science, qualified science, and remember to mention it to Merrick when you see him, Peter, please. And if that is the foundation, and if we know how to select the best and the brightest, in the end, we will establish the right partnerships that are so critical to what we are suggesting as innovation-led agenda. So this is really the most critical thing. Andrew, today I'm going to change the order. I will start by bragging. But before I brag, Michael, you do great, but not enough. So keep going. And if you want, I mean, we trained yesterday at Queen's Park. We know how to deal with politicians. Take us to Ottawa, and we'll show you how to do it.
Sounds good.
So in terms of sharing with you the good news, so you probably know that Mars Innovation started after discussions in Ottawa by STIC about the future, and everybody said, well, while we have great science, we are lagging behind on commercialization, we got to do something, and they came up with what I believe to be a brilliant idea called the CSER, holds for Centers of Excellence in Commercialization and Research. It's so brilliant that I decided to come. And I came to run Mars Innovation, and the reason I got excited is because of the fact that people understood that continue to go by the silo approach does not work anymore. There's a broken paradigm in terms of the classical approach to tech transfer. So what this community has done, and by the way, everybody else in the United States and in Europe is trying to duplicate it, which is essentially to create a one-stop shopping for great and promising technologies. So over the years, this is now almost 8 years of operation for Mars Innovation, we were able to collect close to 2,000 ideas, which we call them disclosures, coming from 15 institutions in this community. And deal flow is #1 element that promises success. So out of the close to 2,000, obviously, with limited amounts, it's all because of Michael, we could not take care of everything, so we had to be selective. And the reason why we had to be selective is because this is my belief that in 10 years, and we start counting when I landed in June of 2009, in 10 years, we have to be able to stand in front of everybody who belongs to the definition of stakeholders and show them return on investment. And it cannot be in number of companies that we start. It cannot be just in terms of meager royalties. It has to be big numbers. And trust me, when I come back to Neil in 10 years, because he asked me a number of times, what have you accomplished so far? And if I show him the big numbers, he will listen to us. Most likely. So over 8 years, close to 2,000 disclosures, we selected something that we call the portfolio of Mars Innovation, which is made of about 100 projects. Of the 100 projects, we led 40 into companies that we created, but still, not talking about counts, talking about value. And so the 40 companies that we created each and every company, beyond the funding, the seed funding that they got from Mars Innovation, which is still pre-seed stage, all of them managed to raise capital from others. But don't get too excited, because we are still at the level of pre-seed seed stage. So when I started, yes, we'll mention the valley of death. When I started, we used to call it the chasm, because it sounds very sophisticated. But it really is the valley of death. Guess what, Paul? Now we have identified 3 valleys of death. Because I always thought that once we cross the valley of death, that is at the pre-seed stage, eventually, sky's the limit. We are now facing 2 other, and so we have to address the situation to way beyond where Mars Innovation started. So people ask me, so really what is the #1 accomplishment? And I think that the evidence is in the room. In the room, we have Kaldeep, and we have Chelsea, and they represent JJIC and JLabs. And if you were to ask them today, why are you in town? So at the beginning, I thought that Kaldeep likes the way I smile. Turns out that it's not enough. They are here because after a campaign we ran with the assets, even though early stage asset, they know that not having a stop in Ottawa, rather in Ontario, is a mistake. You cannot afford to not be here. And just as a final comment on my preliminary stage, I will tell you, Chelsea, I'm not going to tell you which company, because then you will ask for commission on it. But I will tell you that next day, after announcement of JLabs in Toronto, I got a call from 3 companies asking, what's going on? Where were you? What about us? Which comes to show that we are bragging, people are coming, things are happening, and more to come. Because I cannot destroy my reputation, I have to tell you that even though it all looks very rosy, it's just the beginning. So yesterday, where's Jason? As Jason troops, we conquered Queen's Park for one day, and we met with some interesting politicians. And in one of the sessions, the MPP asked me, so if you had a chance to have only one ask, well, what will it be? So I say, I need you to help us raise $300 million seed stage fund. And David Allen, who was there with me, kicked me in the leg and says, Rafi, it's about time you understand the business that you're representing. Enough with the $300 million. It's about time you ask for $20 billion.
And the answer?
Still working on it.
I do some very rudimentary math at the federal level.
Why $20 billion?
Yeah, well, I multiply it when you go to the federal level, because if it's $20 billion for Ontario. So there are a couple of strands here that maybe we can try and make some whole cloth with. I guess the secret sauce has got 2 fundamental components: the science, good science, basic science, and then for that to sort of blossom and really flourish, it requires investment. So maybe I'll start with the science part. Do we have it right? Are we doing it well? Are we producing too much in too many baskets, or are we producing enough? Is it focused enough? And what's the sort of, how do we get to that place where we continue to sort of drive this agenda forward? Rafi?
Well, the science is great, because if you look at the ranking, the international ranking, Universities of Canada are part of the 20 lead institutions. Couldn't be better. I mean, there's 500 there, and to be part of the 20 couldn't be better. Is it leading to translational research? That is a bit of a challenge. And that's where there's a call for educational change. And this is part of what we all need to do. And I will say that the institutions are open for business. Murray Gertler always told the story that when he came for the first convocation, when he became president, he asked students, what are your plans for the future? Everybody wanted to own a company. And he, as a president of a leading university, says, well, it's about time that we address entrepreneurship. So there is something to be said about education, but the baseline, the science is superb. unless Kaldeep tells me otherwise.
Yeah, Neil, you touched on this.
Well, I was just going to say that the science is great, and a lot of things are invented here, but we don't have a good environment to commercialize. And that's been the challenge. And that's really what all this work in the last couple of years has been trying to address, is to make, and I'm talking about healthcare, not about agriculture and these other areas, but it's not a market that accepts new innovation. And so those are the things we're trying to move the needle on.
You talk about it as a market when you think about the healthcare system,
Yeah.
taking in when they're already faced with some challenges from a financial standpoint. Is that,
Yeah, well, what I mean is that if you have a startup company and you want to rapidly prototype and work within your home market, this is not a great place for that, because just we're mired in regulation and financial silos. And so that's why we strongly feel that needs to change, to be a more receptive market for entrepreneurs to develop their companies. You know, a good example, I was in Alberta a couple of weeks ago, and this is similar in Ontario, but there's a company there called Calgary Scientific, and they developed a cloud-based radiology service, and they could not commercialize in Alberta. So they went to the US, and they've been hugely successful. Now, that's not a bad thing, but if they didn't have the investment to go to that huge market, they would have been stalled. And many of our companies are stalled because they can't get a start.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We are growing the market for bio-based succinic acid because our product is less expensive than the petroleum product. We are growing it by having a global supply chain pull it through. We work with our customers to develop applications. Many of our customers that could be here do not have the reach either into their parents or their global supply chain to pull the product through. So if Ford would use our product for automotive foams, it means that Woodbridge has to produce the polyester polyols. They have to go to their supplier has to use our product. We have to provide the product at every stage and make sure the applications are going to produce the performance, the price, and the volume necessary for people to buy it along that supply chain. And those supply chains are difficult to replicate here if you're a small company and don't have that international reach or don't have those international partners.
So I would say that the government has a pie, and they got to split the pie in a number of different ways. And basic science absolutely needs money, okay? There are a lot of reforms happening right now, and a lot of scientists are speaking out and saying, we don't have enough science, we don't have enough big grants to do things, okay? So when they think, okay, I need money for basic science, but someone else is asking for translation, commercialization, I don't want to talk about that because I need my basic science money. But then we also need to push that pipeline forward into translation and commercialization. So the CSER program, an excellent way to try and drive that through. But Rafi needs some steroids. He needs $300 million, absolutely, to push those companies all the way forward. If you look at the US, they have the SBI. $1 billion. There you go. Good, keep it going. So if you look at the SBIR program in the US, or the STTR program, they have about $750 million this year to go into companies. And they mandate that every government department agency, like the Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, that are over $100 million in funds, put 3% into innovation. And those funds go directly into companies. 23? It's a purchase, first purchase. 23. Even bigger.
You know the number, Dan.
Good, good. So I read in the news recently that CIHR has stopped their POP program. POP program supported a lot of early stage companies. Why? Why would you do that? That program, as well as other programs, need to be there. But as I go back to that pie, we got to divide it up, and we need to argue on both sides that they both need to be funded.
So I will offer that I think our basic science has been great. Right now, for the agricultural sector, I can also argue that it sucks, because we don't have the necessary people coming back in that we're going to require for the future here of what kind of bug am I dealing with now that I'm dealing with climate change. I've heard terms up here of adaptation, mitigation, wonder bar. I don't really care. The reality is I have a no-till drill that I hook onto a tractor, and that draw bolt doesn't know whether it's adapting or mitigating, but it knows it's under stress. And that reality is what we're dealing with here. Science is under stress. We have built a great economy on stuff we've done in the past, but we have not transitioned fast enough, in my opinion, to stay that world leader. And this is coming from a guy who represents has the opportunity to represent 37,000 farmers in this province. Now, whether you want to call them corporations, because guess what? We're just like every other corporation. We're trying to screw the government out of money that we want from them. The next issue is that we're also farm families. But we cannot move our farms. That's why science is so important to keep our toolbox full. So at this particular time, if we're going to go to the government and ask for big numbers, you better be able to go to your rest of that supply chain, because I had the opportunity this past week while in Paris to talk to folks from Kellogg's and Monsanto and other areas. The private sector has a whole lot of dollars. If we're not going to start building supply chains with actual meaningful links, and if we're not going to stand up for one another in this new world of called social license, which to me means 140 characters coming from people who are Google experts after 15 minutes of searching crap, the reality is about 139 of those characters are usually wrong, but nobody is refuting it. So unless we're going to start standing up for the good research and get the job done, let's start putting our money where our mouth is on part of this, because to get the fund, you better have the assets, because as has already been pointed out, return on investment is going to pave the way. And it only paves the way if the science is good. The science was good. I'm not sure it's good for the future, because I can't even give you a soils map for certain regions of this province that doesn't have the date of 1929 on it. That happens to be the year my father was born. That's a problem. We have to start investing on our own, but remember, when you're pointing fingers, you got three pointing back. Let's make sure we clean up our own house and tighten these supply links as we go.
See, it takes two farmers to get the ask done. Anyways, Neil, it's almost an hour, and we haven't mentioned apnea DX even once.
I was going to bring that up, actually.
So, can I use it?
Absolutely,
okay,
please
thank
do.
You.
It's yours.
I guess the point I want to make is that, to your question, Andrew, science is great. I think it'll be very difficult to ask scientists to be navigated by what we believe to be the market pool. They should continue to do what they do. It's our role to identify the opportunities. And quite frankly, we have one that is very close to become of the right size that we talk about. Don't go, Zaina, because I'm going to mention your name. So,
not getting out that easy.
So apnea DX is an idea that came out of a lab of Toronto Rehab, together with a lab in Toronto General, experts in the field of developing tech, med tech, and we had many examples of in the med tech. But there's only one sleep apnea detector. And the reason why there is one example of a sleep apnea detector is because of the fact that we coalesced everything that's available, everything that's been created, the right types of scientists, people who understand what it takes to translate basic science into marketable products. Add to it the fact that some of us put some money into this so that we can start putting together a plan. Highlight the fact that Zaina took care of them through Mass Excite. Have you spoken about Mass Excite this morning? Not yet. So
I mentioned it, actually.
But you mentioned. So through MassExcite, I think that we accelerated the pace of getting the data that's needed for eventually address procurement in the province. And let's face it, whenever we go to the world, they ask, have you started using it in your backyard? And we have to be able to answer the question in a positive way. So with Apnea DX, which by the way changed its name, it's called Brazotec, but the product is called Apnea Detector. With Brazotec, I believe that we do everything just right. And next year, we'll report to you how successful we were in coalescing all the capacity that's available to us to get a product to the market in a relatively short period of time.
We have about 10, 15 or so. Are there questions out in the room? Maybe over here.
Here's a microphone. Hi, thanks. I just have a quick question for you, Neil. You mentioned the challenges in commercialization. I got two questions. One is, what would you change? Is it really at the level of policymakers, the laws, or the government? Or is it really the commercial scale, the size? Is that size and scale just not here in Canada, and it's there in the US, for example? What would you change?
Yeah, well, we can't really change the size or scale that quickly, but I think that other environments do a better job of, bringing entrepreneurs' products into their marketplace, and they're, one of the things that we fight with, and it's a much bigger discussion than we're having today, is that fee-for-service doesn't recognize new things very quickly. And that's a whole other discussion. But we do find that markets that have moved out of fee-for-service are more rapid innovators. So that would be one thing. The other thing is just procurement. And I didn't really expand on that, but procurement is primarily focused on driving costs down when they should be focused on driving value up. And so again, if you're looking for value, Rafi's company, Apnea DX, it obviates a lot of sort of redundant capacity in the healthcare system, but people are protecting that. But procurement could potentially drive that if they were open to that. So I think there's a lot of things within our control in the healthcare system that need to change. And I'm very encouraged, by the way. I'm encouraged by Bill Charnetsky's appointment. He'll be speaking this afternoon. I'm encouraged by the fact that the health ministers, both in Ontario and federally, are talking about innovation in the health sphere. So I think that you will see, maybe at the 10-year mark of Rafi's ROI, these things will all come into place.
But procurement is not just a function of government. Procurement is also a responsibility of the people running the companies who want to make sure that their companies are innovative, more environmentally sustainable. The companies that Don was talking about, the 78 companies under the Davos banner and the 150 some odd companies under the American Business Act on climate change, who have made specific commitments to greening their companies, to producing better vehicles, better products, have a responsibility to start pulling through these technologies. They have a responsibility to have a dialogue, whether it's through LSO or BIOTECanada, with the people in these rooms who have technologies, who are going to produce the return on investment that is required. This is not just a responsibility of government. It is a responsibility of our big companies, our corporate citizenry.
We heard this morning from Chris, kind of controversial, that we have a fragmentation problem here in Canada. We don't have a cohesive voice. The other thing we also have a problem is the language we use. because innovation means so many different things and people use it differently. It's my opinion we have a development gap in Canada. We've got great discovery, but no money to bring it through development, then to commercialization. My question is, I've looked at the number of enablers and accelerators, again, all different names across Canada, just to see their productivity index. And you won't find hard measurements of their delivery. So the question I wanted to pose to the panel is, do we have too many? Aren't they not good enough? Again, trying to solicit what your experience and what your feeling is about enablers and accelerators, because you know the federal government is putting even more money into it.
Do we want to tackle that one?
I just wanted to address the first point about innovation. I agree with you. It tends to be a vague term. And so we've tried to, in the various pieces of work that we've done, to define it clearly. And I really like Roger Martin from Rotman, his definition. First of all, he clearly states that innovation is not invention. Actually, innovation is applying existing knowledge, in this case, to improving outcomes and efficiency in the healthcare system is what I've been talking about. So I think if you have kind of a clearer focus that way, then you don't have any difficulty with the definition.
Don and then Rafi.
So I have some experience with what I would consider enabler, and that's the opportunity to serve as a vice chair to BioIndustrial Innovation Canada, which is an exercise in attempting to help to bring along companies to Canada in the bioproducts region. And we're very, very thankful for BioAmber to help be one of the extreme success stories that we have available to us. I think your question is a good one. The problem is that we're still wanting to put some onus back onto a government who has to crank out a press release with a big enough number on a given day to get the CBC's attention so that they publish it. The reality is that the government then can only really afford to fund the issue that we need an office someplace, we need some people there to answer the phone, and Lord help us if we give them any money, because they might actually use it to invest in somebody, and then the Auditor General 5 years later is going to criticize them for it. So until we actually change our framework of how we wish to realize that there are going to be some failures along the way here, and that not everything is going to get commercialized no matter how hard you try, that's just life.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think failure is an option. It's going to happen. If you look at the venture capital statistics, 1 out of 10 makes it. When I was doing venture capital, in one of our funds, we had one company that was sold for over $1 billion that made the whole fund profitable. That was it. There's a lot of losers along the way. And I think the government has to say, okay, we're going to lose a lot of companies. And those metrics are going to be tough. It's a really turbulent time getting through that development phase to commercialization. And lots of things happen, and it's very hard to come up with the metrics. We're asked for our metrics all of the time by the government. And it's easier to say, okay, this is my IRR that I made money off of the company. But in that turbulent phase, it's really hard to see what's going to happen and say to someone, this is what I did with my money. I do agree, though, that the fragmentation is a big issue. And if we were to kind of pull that together, I think Mars has done a lot of good work in that area to try and bring everyone together, then we can be more efficient.
Just before I turn it to you, Rafi, I think just one quibble with that one, which is I think governments have an easy time accepting failure. In fact, it's kind of what they thrive in at times. What I think they actually struggle more with is the definition of success, which is they're often expecting bricks and mortar to be the result and a ribbon cutting in front of a big, beautiful building. And success has a different take in our sector, which can often be something that they're not as excited about, but they should also accept that that's exactly how the industry sort of unfolds.
Yeah.
Rafi.
Yeah, so I'll address the two parts of your question. So number one, in terms of the efficiency, I think that there is too many. If you promise not to report me back to Ottawa, I'll tell you that 30 Caesars is way too much. We should have viewed this. I mean, this is a very bold decision made by STIC in 2007. They should have announced on a 10-year experimental decade, pick 10 in the most promising areas for Canada, and cover the cost in a proper way, because what you see is that all of us are funded in a suboptimal way, and then it becomes a challenge. And we spend too much time chasing for bits and pieces of financing, which is really becoming quite exhausting. So if we come up with a new plan, let's make sure that we maximize the chance of a few to succeed, because based on a few success stories, all the rest will fall into place. In terms of advocacy, this is me putting the hat of a member of the board of LSO, I have to say that our slogan is one voice. And we have to improve on it. We have to view ourselves as a communal team, because yesterday, at least, indicated to me when we met with politicians is that we have a lot to do in terms of improving the messaging to them so that in the end, they make the right decision on our behalf.
Do we have one more question for your chairman? Paul, you had a question. Yeah, I know, that's what I thought. It's a rhetorical question.
Now I have to remember my question. I guess I was thinking of the procurement piece and how that seems to me to be an issue right across the life sciences sectors. I'm involved with a clean tech company, and we make bio-based products to replace oil-based products in wood composites and paper. And in Canada, you know, we just don't have the environment that encourages the replacement of those products. And the reality is that with the price of oil today, companies talk a good line, but they're not replacing oil-based products because of the cost situation. So somehow we need to find a way to encourage procurement. I think the OCHIS is fantastic. Well, as you said, we'll hear from Bill a little bit later. But this seems to be an issue that's fairly common. How do we get government, as we think about a broader life sciences strategy, maybe this is one of the key elements, I'm sure it is how do we get government to encourage procurement of these new technologies which fit with their objectives around healthcare objectives, environmental objectives, agricultural objectives, and so on. So any comments on that? And I was particularly interested because I know the med tech side and procurement issues there, but would it help if we could encourage government to set some targets like Europe does, for example, on replacement of oil-based products?
I'm not a huge. I went to a presentation by a very large tier 1 car company on Tuesday, and the gentleman stood up, and and the car company is making some very huge investments in Ontario, big investments in Oshawa, big investments in Kitchener, all around the connected car, which of course is the future of that industry, and he recognizes that. And he was asking the government to mandate this, to mandate that. And I stood up and asked him, you've talked about the mandates the government should produce, and what mandates are you giving to your suppliers to pull these technologies that are going to make your company more profitable? What are you doing to put those in place? And it took him 15 seconds to respond, and when he did respond, it was a reasonably good response. I think that one of the problems that we have is the number of big companies that are represented in Canada by subsidiaries, and the decision-making is hard to get at. And when I talk about the responsibility of corporate citizenry for pulling through for de-risking some of these technologies, not because it's good for government objectives, but because it's good for business, it's good for our environment. The price of oil, you are looking at big subsidies to oil and gas. If we eliminated many of those subsidies, companies like the ones you're talking about would be on a better playing field. If we get a good result at COP21, it may provide some of the tailwinds that we need to understand that perhaps it's worth investing in these technologies, not because they're going to be competitive, or not because oil prices are high, but because leaving oil in the ground is the right thing to do. And so I think that the dialogue has to change somewhat. It has to bring more of the private sector in. It has to give the government its due in terms of the quality of life and the economic growth they're trying to produce. But we need to help them with that pull through, because that pull through has to be, as Don says, it has to be profitable, and it has to be moving companies in the direction of being more innovative and more sustainable.
Just a piece of that I wanted to maybe throw it to you, Neil, which is the med device has obviously got a sort of slightly unique part of this, and maybe you can expand a bit on the uptake of the device.
Well, I was just going to say that there is quite a difference, and some of the comments of Anne highlighted this, between the way industry procures versus the way government procures. And that is that they truly do appreciate the business case of working with different suppliers and what their raw materials are, et cetera. So I think there's a massive re-education of procurement in the government sector that needs to occur. And I think that the way it's done currently, it's very low risk, and it doesn't appreciate the business case of the proponents. Instead, it just focuses on the cost. And I've been concerned recently, you hear, and I'm not in the pharma sector, but you hear about, government talking about group purchasing, like it's going to have a single price for the whole country and this sort of thing for pharma. And I think, we've lived that in the device sector, and it's not pretty. And I think that they need to understand better what the value is, the value of the outcomes, rather than the cost of the product. And so I think it needs a whole re-education process. And I think we are starting that. It's not just, with the OCHIS, but it's also with the government-wide purchasing in Ontario. So I think that process is underway, but it's going to take some time to re-educate.
Yeah, on the genomic side, I just wanted to quickly say we're seeing a lot of new diagnostic tests that are coming out, and the biggest challenge is not actually going through that innovation and proving that it's a good diagnostic to have, it's getting it reimbursed. And then you have to go to each different province, and they all have their own different rules. So there's no kind of national strategy for how we're going to put those onto the market. And that's really the biggest challenge, is that last step, is getting it to a patient and being affordable or being reimbursed.
Yeah, thanks for raising the diagnostic issue, because I've lived that as well. I've been with two companies that both made their major investments in the United States because they couldn't get reimbursement in Canada.
Yeah.
And we've got to stop that somehow.
Yeah.
So I'd like to offer that, coming from farm with an F instead of PH, the issue is for us that there's only one rule, and that's Mother Nature wins. So the issue becomes, if you want us to sign on to issues of procurement, you're going to need to understand clearly that we cannot deal with continuous improvement in our industry, because I don't get to decide this year's a drought or this year's a flood. I get to look for ongoing improvement. And I would ask that we stop now and start taking a look at some of these old concepts of well, government should just buy a bunch of this stuff and put it into the hospital for me. Government should buy all my corn and make sure it only goes to Ann because they're backing her. That isn't the way it's going to work, never has, never will, because once government steps in, somebody else is ugly and now in there lobbying to take it away from you. So the reality becomes, as I see things unfolding here on the issues of supply chain, the biggest issue that's still needed here is dialogue. Because bottom line, what you described in the front end of your question of the fact that, you know, people say one thing and do another, welcome to my world. They do it every day they walk in the grocery store. I want the best, the freshest, the newest, the most wonderful. By the way, I won't pay anything more for it, and if the apple goes up by 3 cents, I'm buying it from Washington. So suck it up, princess. Get used to it. It's a reality. And let's stop inventing new words just to make sure that there's still a market dynamic here. If we actually want to make things happen in Ontario, we're going to do it by building chains that recognize everybody in the chain has to make a living. And procurement usually means you're taking it from someplace else and putting it over here. I used to be a proponent for it, believe me, because there's nothing better than Ontario anything. But at the end of the day, we are going to lead by example by getting rid of a bunch of regulatory stuff, not in putting new in place to replace the old.
So we're going to keep the trains running on time. Thank you all. I think what I took away from it at least is we've got the foundation. We've got a province that is probably the envy of the rest of the country, if not other jurisdictions around the world. We just need a better story and a little bit more audacious in terms of where we're going and what we're asking for as an industry in terms of what we need to make it all happen. That's my takeaway. Thank you all very much for your perspectives.